Hey everybody, it's Farmer Matt here at the Dutch Project, and I just wanted to highlight a wild plant that is growing on our property that is really wonderful, and if you live in the northeast of the US, this plant may be growing near you. This is a Juneberry, which is also sometimes called a Saskatoon, and there's a whole bunch of different species. These are a native fruit to the northeast, and they're in the apple family. They have this kind of delicate looking foliage. We just missed this one blooming, but the blossoms look like apple blossoms. And here you can see the blossoms that were pollinated and are going to form the Juneberries, which are called Juneberries because they ripen in June. Although around here, depending on how cold the spring is, it's actually sometimes early July when they ripen. And the flavor of Juneberries is often described as like a blueberry, but with a pit that has the flavor of an almond. And that's actually a very accurate description. I find them really tasty. And I'll come out here and I'll harvest Juneberries from the wild plants. And there's also some cultivated varieties of Juneberries, and we have those growing too in a different part of the farm. When I first got interested in farming and harvesting my own food, I got some land, and I immediately started like cutting stuff down and clearing things. And I had read a piece of advice somewhere that you shouldn't cut down any plant until you can identify what it is. And I was too excited and I didn't listen to that advice, but I should have, because when I moved to the second property that I farmed on, where I am now at the Dacha Project, I knew more about plants, I could identify more things, and when I went out to the wild parts of the land, I noticed all sorts of wonderful food plants that were just growing here that I didn't have to plant and I didn't have to take care of. And those are the best things. You just harvest the food, you don't have to do anything else. And I noticed that there were Juneberries all over our property. And I went around and I marked them to make sure I wouldn't accidentally cut them down if I was clearing land. And in a second, I'm going to show you some other plants that I found on our property just growing wild, uncultivated. Here I'm with a crabapple tree, and when we brush hogged this field, we found crabapple trees all over the field, some that were already flowering and already a really good size. And one really great thing you can do if you find a crabapple tree, well, first of all, don't kill it, because crabapples are wonderful. They're great for wildlife and birds, and you can take the crabapples and make cider or crabapple jelly. But you can also graft the trees to edible apple varieties. So nature did the job of planting this tree, selecting a tree that has really good roots that do well right here, and then you can go, and if you get some ironwood, you can graft onto it whatever tasty apple variety you want. So we just did these chip buds this year. A friend of ours who works at a nursery came over and showed us how to chip bud into apple trees. So hopefully in a couple years this tree will be producing edible apple varieties. I'm going to show you one more tree. This is well, it's not a wild pear because there are really no wild pears in the Northeast, but it is a feral pear, you should say. And we found this when we were clearing this field, and at first I thought it was an apple tree because it hadn't leafed out yet, but because the bark looks very similar. But once it leafed out, I noticed that the leaves were much more delicate than an apple leaf, and kind of more oval, kind of like those Juneberry leaves that you saw. But I could tell obviously that it wasn't a Juneberry, so I eventually figured out that it was a pear tree. And this just shows you that there's not only wild species like Juneberries and crabapples on old property, but there can be cultivated species whose seeds are planted by birds, or who maybe somebody planted years ago and forgot about, or maybe somebody was riding a dirt bike back here and they threw a paracord out of their pocket and planted a pear tree. Who knows how it came here, but it was really wonderful to find. As you can see, it's already, 15 or 20 feet tall, and it should start making pears in a few years. And because I know it came from a cultivated pear, because there's not, like I said, wild pears growing in the Northeast, it has a pretty good chance to make tasty fruit. I've eaten a lot of feral pear trees that grow around where we live in upstate New York, and they're usually pretty good. So I'm hopeful that when this starts flowering in a few years, it will make some tasty pears.